Washington Journal continues.
We want to welcome Michael Koplow. He is a professor at Georgetown University in the Department of Government. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
We want to focus on Tunisia, so much in the news this past week, and the piece in Newsweek magazine calling it a week of tremendous change for that country. Let's take a step back. Where is it located? Why is it important to the U.S., and what role does it play in that region of the world?
Sure. Tunisia is located in North Africa. It's very close to Europe. Many Tunisians spend time in France and they go back and forth between Europe and Tunisia, and so they're familiar with much of what goes on outside of their region and outside of the Arab world. Tunisia is an American ally. It has been an important ally in the war on terror. President Ben Ali was a friend to America in terms of helping out with intelligence. There have been reports that he helped with renditions, certainly with interrogations in that part of the world. And so Tunisia has been important to U.S. interests, but it's not as important as a place like Egypt or Jordan, where we have vital interests. Tunisia has always taken a little bit of a step back. And so Ben Ali's being removed from power in Tunisia certainly isn't necessarily being welcomed among the intelligence community, but from a U.S. standpoint, what replaces him will be interesting to see, whether it's Islamists, whether it's secularists, whether it turns democratic, whether it remains authoritarian. It's going to be interesting to see how the process plays out over the next few months.
One of the changes is more religious freedom that country is seeing. What did the people of Tunisia have prior to this past week, and why did it change?
Ben Ali was a committed secularist. Tunisia historically is a very secular country, and his predecessor, Habib Bourguiba, who founded the Tunisian state when they became independent from France in 1956, put in place a policy of state secularism. Bourguiba himself was relatively hostile to Islam. He referred to the veil as an odious rag. He tried to do away with Ramadan, which didn't go over too well. And so secularism in Tunisia has really been the state doctrine and the state ideology. And in that vein, President Ben Ali, when he took over from Bourguiba in 1987, really pushed that meme and continued the secular ideology in Tunisia. Now, Tunisia is 99% Muslim, and so they don't have very many religious minorities. There's a small Christian community, and there is a small Jewish community, but for the most part, Tunisia is almost entirely Sunni Muslim. And Tunisian society, while secular, certainly there are religious Muslims within Tunisia. And I think that religious freedom, while respected to an extent under Ben Ali, was not respected to the extent people would have liked. At one point, he banned the headscarf, and there has certainly been state discrimination against men with beards that are deemed to be too long or women who wear headscarves in public. And so while religious freedom hasn't necessarily been protected to the same extent that it is in other places, certainly, Islam is a factor there, and people have been able to worship freely, if not necessarily display their religion in public to the same extent that you see in other countries.
The other part of this story is the impact it's having on the region. This is a piece from the New York Times this past week. Begins with Michael Slackman. The dateline is Cairo, saying Arab leaders meeting for the first time since the public revolt in Tunisia toppled its autocratic president. Hearing one of its own, a consummate Arab insider, warning that, quote, the Arab soul is broke by poverty, unemployment, and general recession. And the story points out that the Arab League is told a recent revolt is not far from us.
Yeah, I think that predictions of revolt across other Arab countries are perhaps getting a little ahead of themselves.
Why?
There are a few factors that make the revolt in Tunisia more likely. The first is the military. The military in other Arab states is very connected to the state. If you look at Egypt, or if you look at a place like Algeria, the militaries were really instrumental in founding the state and in setting up the political system, and they have also inserted themselves into politics from time to time. The military in Egypt is certainly not an apolitical actor. And as we've seen in Algeria, where the military stepped in 1992 after elections there, the military there as well has been willing to involve themselves in politics. In Tunisia, that's very different. To begin with, the military did not have a role in founding the state. The state, as I mentioned, was founded by Habib Bourguiba, who was a lawyer and a politician. And the political party, the Neo Destour, or New Constitutional Party, were the ones who founded the state. Bourguiba purposely kept the military out of it. he kept the military small, and he kept the military apolitical. On top of that, the military in Tunisia is smaller than other militaries in the Arab world. Military spending in Tunisia went down from 2.3% when Ben Ali took over in 1987 to 1.4% as of 2009. In contrast, Egypt's military GDP, the spending is something like 2.3% of GDP. In other countries, it's much higher. And so the military didn't have the resources. And that being said, when push came to shove, when it came time for the military to either back Ben Ali and back the regime or side with the protesters and push him out, the military decided to side with the protesters. And something like that really is tough to imagine happening in a place like Egypt or a place like Jordan, where King Abdullah is the commander-in-chief. The second factor that makes Tunisia different is Islamists. The main opposition in other Arab countries are political Islamists. And in Tunisia, Bourguiba and Ben Ali both eradicated them. There really is very little Islamist presence in Tunisia. Most of the leaders of the Islamist party, the Nakhda party or Renaissance party, live abroad. They were either exiled or they were put in prison. And so when the decision came to either crack down on protesters or let them have their demands, the threat perception on the part of the regime was very much reduced in Tunisia because the Islamists were not there. And there was no threat of an Islamist takeover. In Egypt, by contrast, if there were demonstrations for change, President Mubarak would be looking at a situation where you'd have the Muslim Brotherhood or other Islamist groups almost definitely take over. And I think that really impacts the decisions that both the regime and the military make when they're faced with protesters.
Michael Koplow writes about this in a recent edition of Foreign Policy. This is what it looks like, why Tunisia's revolution is Islamist-free. Our phone lines are open. Our guest is at Georgetown University. He's a graduate of Harvard and NYU and Brandeis University. Joanne is joining us on the Republican line from Nashville, Tennessee. Good morning.
Good morning. Doesn't it seem rather oxymoronic to refer to a country as our friend when the leader is our friend, but the people are not our friends?
Sure. I think that when we're referring to countries as our friends or allies, we're generally talking about the governments. That being said, I'm not sure we can say that the Tunisian people are not our friends. Tunisia is historically a very secular society and a Western-oriented society, as I mentioned up front. And I think that while there are certainly segments of Tunisian society that probably do not like U.S. policy, I think it's perhaps a little hasty to refer to the Tunisian people as categorically not our friends. As in any state in the world, there are going to be some people who are pro-American and some people who are not. And so I'm not sure you can make a blanket statement about the Tunisian people, whether they are friends of America or are not. I think that the real factor for U.S. interests is whether the Tunisian government that emerges is going to be a U.S. ally, pro-Western, and willing to work with the United States and with U.S. policy in the Middle East.
Some history on the country. It gained its independence from France in 1956. Prior to March 20th, 1956, what control did France have on Tunisia?
Tunisia was a French colony. France controlled Algeria, Tunisia, and other areas of North Africa. And Tunisia was historically a colony of France. But unlike Algeria, the army did not have a role in Tunisian independence. There was some guerrilla movement, but you didn't have a large-scale war of independence like you had next door in Algeria.
Relatively small country, 163,000 square miles. Its population just under 11 million residents. 98% of the country Muslim, 1% Christian, and another 1% Jewish or other religion. So what impact with such a predominantly Muslim country does that have on the makeup of the country?
As I said up front, the country is almost entirely Sunni Muslim. And so you don't have the social divisions you have in other states. There has been talk in the last week about revolts in Egypt, and I think that the main opposition figures in Egypt, both parties and civil society groups, NGOs, are actually a little wary of similar events taking place in Egypt, because in Egypt you have large divisions. There are sectarian divisions between Muslims and Christian Copts. There are lots of class divisions. Tunisia is a relatively homogenous society, both in terms of its religion, in terms of class, in terms of ethnic background. There isn't a large Berber population as you have next door in Morocco. And so I think that Tunisia has some advantages that other states in that region do not have when it comes to the chances for democracy.
Why was it called the Tweet Revolt?
It was called the Tweet Revolt because Twitter was used by many of the protesters both to organize and to get out news as to what was happening in Tunisia. Middle Eastern analysts were able to follow what was going on in real time with a few Twitter hashtags. Tunisians, being secular and relatively well off and well educated, are pretty familiar with this type of technology. In fact, a prominent Tunisian blogger, Slim Amamou, is the new Minister for Youth and Sport in Tunisia. He was simply a blogger 2 weeks ago who had been imprisoned by the Ben Ali regime, and he's now a minister. And so you can see the impact that Twitter had on the revolution.
And as we look at some of these pictures from the last week and a half to 2 weeks, there had been some criticism that the U.S. government, most notably Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, was not quick to give any response to this. Why?
I think that the U.S. government has to walk a fine line. The U.S. government has many interests in the Middle East, from making sure that there's a free flow of oil to protecting Israel, and the U.S. really does walk a fine line. They don't want to be put in a situation where they back a revolt that doesn't go anywhere, or be put in a situation where they seem to be throwing an important ally under the bus. On the other hand, the U.S. does stand with democracy, and so it's very tough to both support a popular protest while at the same time not appearing to throw an ally over the side of the boat.
We're talking with Michael Koplow of Georgetown University. Next is Herb from Buffalo, New York. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Cold Buffalo, where it's so cold the politicians have their hands in their own pockets. But
good to hear from you, Herb.
My question to Mr. Koplow and a quick comment is that, yes, as Mr. Koplow knows, it's a myth that we try to instill democracies in countries around the world, especially in the Middle East, when we give massive financial aid to non-democracies such as Egypt and Jordan, and then walk hand in hand with feudal monarchies such as Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. But having said that, my real question to Mr. Koplow is, now that the people of Tunisia have revolted and apparently are successfully going to bring down this government, this non-democratic government, will that create other Arabs in the streets throughout the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Egypt, Jordan, and so forth, to start attempting to bring down their governments as well?
Sure. I think that there have already been copycat protests of what has occurred in Tunisia. Certainly there's a disturbing trend taking place across the region now of young Arab men lighting themselves on fire, which is what started events in Tunisia a month ago. An unemployed university graduate who was selling fruits and vegetables in a town square lit himself on fire to protest the state taking away his vegetable cart and then refusing to meet with him and give him back his wares. And we've seen copycats of that protest in Algeria and in Egypt, in Mauritania and in other places. And so certainly what happened in Tunisia is having an impact across the Arab world. We've also seen demonstrations. There have been demonstrations in Egypt. This morning there have been reports of demonstrations in Yemen. Demonstrations in Jordan and Algeria were taking place simultaneously with the demonstrations in Tunisia. And so I think this certainly has emboldened Arab publics. That being said, it's important to recognize that Arab publics are not the only ones who are learning the lessons of what happened in Tunisia. Arab autocrats are also learning the lessons of what took place in Tunisia. And Arab regimes have a long and successful history of putting down any pro-democracy protests. And so I think that they as well are looking at what happened and learning the lessons, and whether that means doubling down on repression and cracking down even more on protesters, or it means opening up the political system a little more and a little quicker than President Ben Ali did, Arab autocrats are looking at these events and trying to adapt the same way the Arab public are looking at these events and trying to adapt.
Daniel is joining us from the Fiji Islands. Welcome to you, Daniel.
Yes, good morning. Actually, just history, there's a lot of misinfo, including Mike not saying correctly. Tunisia is a tiny, poor country. It's not in the Middle East. It's in North Africa. I'm surprised you keep saying Middle East. It's not. The other thing is we have to be careful. As I travel many parts of the globe, we have to be careful. This could create a reverse. And I'm not sure, Mike, what you mean by saying our way. Think your way is the right way. We don't know. We don't know where this is going to take. But the other thing is a lot of written recently. I don't think will have any effect on the neighboring country. As a matter of fact, it could do the reverse. But my concern is about the human rights. And anyway, Tunisia is a tiny, tiny country. It's not even 10 million, as they say there. But anyway, this is just a generic population count. The 10 million is a guesstimate.
Okay. Thank you, Daniel.
Correct. I'm not sure I quite understand the caller's question, but just to speak to some of his points. Correct. Tunisia is a small country. It is only 10 million people. I'm not sure what impact the caller is trying to say that it therefore has. In terms of using the term Middle East, generally when people speak of the Middle East, they're referring to the region from North Africa, beginning with Morocco, and stretching across to Iraq. And sometimes when we speak of the Middle East, we include Iran and Turkey as well.
And of course, it's a broader issue that what this story has in the region and whether there's a domino effect, as you've written about with foreign policy, in other parts of the region, including Egypt.
Correct. And like I said earlier, I think that these twin factors of the military and the lack of Islamists really make Tunisia unique in the region. And so I don't think that a domino effect of regimes falling is likely to occur. That being said, the events in Tunisia certainly are influencing Arab publics. Al Jazeera has been covering them almost nonstop for a month and a half, and satellite TV is certainly ubiquitous throughout the Middle East.
Tom has this question: where did the new leaders in Tunisia come from, and what do they believe in?
So the new government in Tunisia is a mix of former RCD party officials. The RCD was the ruling party under Ben Ali, and opposition parties. And there have been protests now for the last 8 days against the new national unity government because they include members of the RCD and old members of the regime. And it's an open question as to whether these former ruling party officials are going to keep their jobs or whether they are going to have to step down. The RCD officials have been taking great pains over the last week or so to distance themselves from the regime. First by touting their technocrat credentials as opposed to people who are close to Ben Ali, and then actually quitting the RCD and dissolving the RCD Central Committee. That has not placated everyone. There was a protest this morning in Tunisia of 5,000 people organized by the UGTT, which is a major Tunisian labor union, and they are calling for Prime Minister Mohamed Ghannouchi, who was the Prime Minister under Ben Ali, and other officials such as Kamal Morjan, who was the Foreign Minister under Ben Ali and has remained in his job, to step down precisely because they were affiliated with the Ben Ali regime. And so it remains to be seen whether these protests are actually going to accomplish their mission.
We're talking about Tunisia and the impact that the demonstrations have had over the last week and a half to 2 weeks, and some background on this North African country. Michael Koplow is with Georgetown University. Anthony is joining us from Bakersfield, California. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. I have a comment and a question. Comment is, this is a religious freedom is an example of chaos. Freedom of religion is, like in this country, freedom from religion is what that actually means. Question, isn't the revolt secular in nature in Tunisia?
Absolutely. The revolt in Tunisia was secular in nature. It was not led by Islamists. If you've read news reports, you know that the early rallies and the early protests were certainly devoid of an Islamist character or an Islamist nature. There were many women who were there who were not wearing headscarves. And yes, the protests certainly were secular in nature. They originated as economic protests, and as they spread, they quickly took on a more political tone in calling for Ben Ali to loosen up his repressive measures and eventually to step down.
Well, let me put one example on the table that you wrote about in Foreign Policy. You say that Ben Ali's fate may have been sealed when military officers who had been marginalized by the regime as it lavished money on family members and corrupt business elites demonstrated a willingness to stand down and protect protesters from the police as well as from internal security services. So what impact did that have on this tweet revolution?
It impacted it very much. It's unclear whether Ben Ali and the regime decided first to announce that he would step down by 2014 and then announce that there would be elections in 6 months and eventually leave. It's unclear if that was the result of a push by the military or if that was someone else. The chief of staff of the military, General Rashid Ammar, is the one who reportedly refused orders to fire on protesters and also reportedly is the one who pushed Ben Ali out. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, that's something that you likely aren't going to see in other Arab states where the military is really bound up with the regime and the state itself. And so I think that in the absence of the military stepping in, you wouldn't see what was going on in Tunisia today.
Our guest is Michael Koplow. Sharik is joining us from Hartford, Connecticut. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you? I'm trying to, piggyback on the other caller from New York. Are there any dominoes to fall? And one of my question is that why did President Ben Ali left so fast? I mean, it was really quick exit, And those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharik.
As I said, I think that the domino theory is very much overblown. Tunisia really is in a unique situation and has a unique set of circumstances. Starting from the Islamist and military issue and moving on to the fact that Tunisia is more secular and relatively more urbanized and educated than other Arab states. And it's also the only Arab state that has a viable non-oil economy and a relatively vibrant and large middle class. And so I think that the domino theory is unlikely to take place.
One tweet saying that early reporting was detailing al-Qaeda's role in Tunisia. Did al-Qaeda have any influence or any role in this?
It did not. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, which is the al-Qaeda offshoot that operates in North Africa, issued a statement after the revolution that removed Ben Ali, congratulating the Tunisian people and issuing their support for what occurred, which is not surprising given that Ben Ali was a secularist who really tried to eradicate political Islam and the role of Islam from public life. That being said, I don't think that al-Qaeda or any other violent Islamic group had a role in what was taking place in Tunisia. It really was an organic, bottom-up revolt on the part of ordinary Tunisians who were simply fed up with the economic situation and the political repression that they had been living under for 2 decades.
Juliet is joining us, Huntsville, Alabama. Good morning to you with Michael Koplow of Georgetown University, an expert on Tunisia. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm very concerned about the nature of the whole thing. The Arabs in Africa, they are now, how would I say it? It seems that they're ashamed of coming from North Africa, and I would like to ask Mr. Koplow why the Arabs that are in North Africa, Northeast Africa, why are they so ashamed of being Africans?
Well, I think that the Arabs in North Africa, I wouldn't say that they're ashamed of being Africans, but they certainly have a different cultural heritage and a different history, originating in the Middle East and then migrating over to North Africa. I think that traditionally there's a general split between sub-Saharan African states and states in North Africa. And so I'm not sure that Tunisians would say, or Arabs who live in North Africa would say that they're ashamed of being African. I think that they embrace lots of different cultural heritages.
How often have you been to Tunisia?
I've lived in the Middle East, and I've traveled across North Africa, although not for the past 3 years. So unfortunately, I haven't been to Tunisia recently, although I'm hoping to go in a couple of months.
Curtis is joining us, Fairfax, Virginia. Good morning.
Good morning. You said they're 98% Muslim country. Most other countries that approach those numbers of majority Muslim are usually really intolerant of the minority religions, like in Lebanon and a lot of the other countries. They're bombing the churches and things like that. I'm just wondering, is that going on in Tunisia? You know, what if like a Christian, if they walked down the street with a Bible, or they worshipped in public or anything like that, wouldn't they be killed or whatever?
Thank you, Curtis, and thanks for listening on C-SPAN Radio, by the way.
No, Curtis. They walking down the street with a Bible in Tunisia certainly would not get you killed. There was some violence in Tunisia in 2002. A synagogue on the island of Jerba was bombed, and that was seen as the work of Al-Qaeda-affiliated militants. But generally in Tunisia, minority religion is respected. The interesting thing is that the main Islamist group in Tunisia, the Nakhda Party, which was really eviscerated by Ben Ali, the leader of Nakhda, Rashid al-Ghanouchi, who has been spending his time in exile in London, has for decades said that he would not use any type of religious test as a qualification for public office. That women and Jews and Christians and other non-Muslims, if they're elected as president and prime minister, he would have no problem with them serving, which is pretty remarkable considering that he's the head of an Islamist political party, and certainly these types of issues have been debated by Islamists throughout the region. But the Islamists in Tunisia really are more moderate and more accepting of Tunisian society than you see in other Arab states. And so I think that irrespective of which party eventually comes to power, freedom of religion will be respected in Tunisia.
Another question from one of our Twitter followers, and you can join as well at cspan.com, twitter.com, I should say, /cspanwj, asking, does the U.S. have a history of influencing Tunisian affairs?
The U.S. has, for the most part, kept out of Tunisian affairs. The country that has been more influential in Tunisia has been France, which was Tunisia's former colonial overlord. The U.S., as I said up front, does have interest in Tunisia, but we have also had disagreements with the Tunisian government, most notably during the Persian Gulf War in 1991, when President Ben Ali and the Tunisian state supported Saddam Hussein in Iraq. The U.S. gives foreign aid to Tunisia, and in the aftermath of the Gulf War, we actually cut it off entirely. It was restored in 1994. But we have had disagreements with Tunisia before, but certainly the U.S. is not the dominant international player in Tunisia. To the extent that there is one, it would be France.
We're talking about the situation in Tunisia. As Newsweek magazine points out, a dizzying week of changes in the government of Tunisia. The story is available online at newsweek.com. Our guest is Michael Koplow of Georgetown University, and Khalid is the last call from Minneapolis. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call, and a great show. Thank you for covering the situation in Tunisia. I have a question and a comment for the guest. Question is, how impact is the higher level of education in Tunisia has on being a cause on this revolution? Do you think that has an impact at all? Because if you notice, it's completely higher than any other parts of the region. And the comment is, I agree with the guest that it is unlikely to happen in other countries in the region, but who knows that this revolution was going to actually take place in Tunisia? No one expected that. So hopefully it will happen again because, it's very, the whole region is in boiling and no one knows exactly what might happen tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalid.
Absolutely. There's certainly no way to predict with 100% certainty what is going to happen in other Arab states in the region. Very few people saw the revolt in Tunisia coming, and very few people predicted that once the demonstration started, they were going to bring down the regime. That being said, I think that, as I've mentioned, there are factors to Tunisia that make it unique. On the question of education, certainly the Tunisian populace is generally more educated than in other Arab states. There are large numbers of university graduates, and that led to these protests because people who have university degrees expect to have jobs that are commensurate with their level of education. And over the past few years, those jobs in Tunisia have not existed. And I think that people's expectations certainly outpaced the capacity of the government to provide what they were expecting. And anytime you have a situation like that, you're going to have protests and you're going to have demonstrations. And certainly the level of education in Tunisia just pushed those along.
So on this Sunday, are things calm? Is there more peace and stability within the government?
I think that they're certainly working very hard to provide as much peace and stability as they can. I expect to see demonstrations continuously as long as members of the RCD are in government, and we'll have to see how they handle those. But I think that Tunisia this morning is certainly looking much better and more optimistic than it was last Sunday morning.
We're talking with Michael Koplow of Georgetown University. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Please come back again.